Her name was Hannah, late 20s, elegant Korean woman, soft pale skin, long dark hair falling over her shoulders, gentle almond eyes filled with quiet emotion. She glanced at him only once. And in that single moment, her entire world froze. Because the man sitting beside her was someone she had once loved so deeply that losing him had almost destroyed her life. But Jaemin did not recognize her. Not yet. The plane slowly lifted from the runway, the deep roar of the engines vibrating softly through the cabin. Passengers leaned back into their seats as the city lights below began to disappear beneath a blanket of clouds. Jaemin closed his eyes, trying to rest. Beside him, Hannah stared quietly at his face. 10 years had passed. 10 long years since the night he had disappeared from her life without explanation. Back then, Jaemin, same appearance, early 20s version, warm smile, hopeful eyes, had been the man who promised her forever. But promises sometimes fade, without warning. Hannah's fingers trembled slightly on the armrest. She had imagined meeting him again 1,000 times. But never like this. Never sitting only inches away from him, while he looked at her like she was just another stranger on a flight. And the most painful part? Jaemin had no idea that the woman beside him was the reason he once believed in love. Halfway through the flight, the cabin lights dimmed even further. Most passengers had fallen asleep. The quiet hum of the engines filled the dark cabin. Jaemin slowly opened his eyes. For a moment, he noticed the woman beside him staring at the window. Something about her felt strangely familiar. But memory is a fragile thing. Sometimes faces change just enough to hide the past completely. Hannah finally spoke. Her voice was soft, careful, almost afraid. Long flights always make people think about the past. Jaemin turned slightly toward her. His calm eyes studied her face for a moment. Sometimes, he replied quietly. But the past is usually better left behind. Hannah looked down at her hands. 'Cause if he remembered the past, he would remember her. And if he remembered her, everything would change. A flight attendant passed quietly through the aisle, offering warm drinks to the few passengers still awake. Hannah accepted a small cup of tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it. Jaemin noticed. "Are you nervous about flying?" he asked. Hannah shook her head gently. "No, just tired." But the truth was far more complicated. Because sitting only inches away from the man who once held her entire heart was far more terrifying than turbulence. Jaemin studied her face again. There was something in her eyes. A sadness that felt strangely familiar. For a brief moment, a forgotten memory flickered somewhere deep in his mind. But it disappeared as quickly as it came. Some memories stay buried for a reason. And some truths take years before they finally return. Hours passed. The plane continued quietly across the dark ocean. Outside the window, the first faint light of dawn began to appear along the horizon. Most passengers were still asleep. But Hannah had not slept at all. She knew this might be the only time she would ever sit this close to him again. So finally, she whispered something so quietly that only he could hear. "Jaemin." The moment the name left her lips, everything changed. 'Cause Jaemin's eyes widened instantly. Slowly, very slowly, he turned to face her. His heart suddenly beating faster. "How do you know my name?" Question hung in the quiet cabin air. And for the first time since the flight began, Hannah looked directly into his eyes. The same eyes she had loved 10 years ago. Jaemin, early 30s, tall Korean man, sharp jawline, calm dark eyes, neatly styled black hair, wearing a dark coat, stared at the woman beside him, confusion slowly replacing the calm expression he had carried throughout the flight. Very few people knew his name on this plane. Yet she had said it so naturally, as if she had spoken it thousands of times before. Hannah, late 20s, elegant Korean woman, soft pale skin, long dark hair over her shoulders, gentle almond eyes carrying years of hidden emotion, held his gaze quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cabin remained dim and silent as the aircraft cut through the pale light of early morning. "Have we met before?" Jamin finally asked. The question lingered between them. Hannah gave a faint smile. But it was the kind of smile people wear when they are trying very hard not to cry. 10 years ago, she said softly. "You promised me you would never forget." Jamin leaned back slowly in his seat. His mind searched desperately through memories that felt distant and blurred. 10 years ago. That was a lifetime ago. Back then, Jamin, younger version, early 20s, hopeful expression, softer features, had been a completely different person. A student with dreams bigger than the world around him. And there had been someone in his life then. Someone who used to sit beside him every evening at the small cafe near the university. Someone who used to laugh whenever he made terrible jokes. A name suddenly surfaced in his memory. "Hannah," he whispered. Hannah's eyes immediately filled with tears. Not because he remembered, but because he almost didn't. 10 years of silence had nearly erased her completely from his life. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Jamin slowly turned fully toward her. "Hannah, from the university?" he asked carefully. She nodded once. The movement was small, but it carried the weight of 10 lost years. "I thought you moved away," he said. Hannah looked down at her hands. "I did," she replied softly. What she did not say was why. 'Cause the truth was something she had buried deep inside her heart. Back then, when Jamin disappeared from her life without explanation, she had searched everywhere for him. Called his friends. Visited his apartment. Even waited outside the old cafe for weeks. But Jamin had vanished. Without a goodbye. Without a message. Without even a reason. And the silence he left behind had broken her completely. Jamin frowned slightly. Something about her words didn't feel right. "I didn't disappear," he said slowly. "I left the country for work. I tried to contact you." Hannah looked up immediately. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not possible," she said quietly. "You never called." "I called many times. You never came to see me." Jamin shook his head. "I went to your apartment." Silence fell between them again. A strange, uncomfortable silence. 'Cause suddenly, a terrifying possibility appeared in both their minds. What if someone had made sure they never found each other again? The aircraft captain announced that the plane would begin its descent in 30 minutes. Passengers slowly started waking around them. But neither Hannah nor Jamin noticed. Both of them were trapped inside a realization that felt impossible. 10 years ago. They had both believed the other one had walked away. And because of that misunderstanding, their lives had taken completely different paths. Jamin looked at her again. This time more carefully. More deeply. And suddenly he noticed something he had completely missed earlier. On Hannah's left hand. A small silver ring. Not a wedding ring. But something else. Something strangely familiar. A ring he remembered giving someone. A very long time ago. The aircraft finally touched down on the runway. A quiet vibration passed through the cabin as the wheels met the ground, and passengers began reaching for their bags. Jamin, early 30s, tall Korean man, sharp jawline, calm dark eyes, neatly styled black hair, wearing a dark coat, remained seated for a moment longer, staring ahead as if the world had suddenly shifted beneath him. Beside him, Hannah, late 20s, elegant Korean woman, soft pale skin, long dark hair over her shoulders, gentle almond eyes filled with quiet emotion, slowly fastened her coat. 10 years. 10 years of believing the other person had simply walked away. And now they were sitting beside each other again like strangers who shared a forgotten history. As passengers began leaving the aircraft, Hannah quietly stood. Jamin watched her for a moment. Something inside him refused to let this moment end so easily. Hannah, wait. She turned slowly. Because after 10 years, this was the first time he had asked her not to leave. The airport terminal buzzed with movement. Rolling suitcases echoed across the polished floor as travelers hurried toward exits and connecting flights. Outside the large glass windows, the early morning sky had turned pale blue. Jamin walked beside Hannah in silence. Both of them unsure what to say next. 10 years had created a distance that words alone could not easily repair. Finally they stopped near the exit doors. Cold air rushed inside each time the doors opened. "Why didn't you ever try to find me again?" Jamin asked quietly. Hannah looked at him. 1,000 memories flickered behind her eyes. "I did," she answered softly. 4 months. Then she reached into her bag and slowly pulled out something carefully wrapped in paper. Something she had carried for a very long time. Hannah slowly unwrapped the paper. Inside was a small stack of old letters. The edges were worn from years of being handled. Jamin frowned slightly. "These are the letters I wrote to you," Hannah said quietly. "You never answered a single one." Jamin stared at the envelopes in disbelief. 'Cause he had never seen them before. His name was written clearly on each one. But the return address was unfamiliar. "Someone sent them back to me," Hannah continued. "Every single time." The realization struck him like a sudden wave. Someone had been standing between them all those years. Someone who had made sure their lives moved in completely different directions. Jamin slowly looked up at her. "Do you know who did it?" Hannah hesitated. Then nodded slowly. "Yes." Outside the airport, cold wind moved through the quiet street as taxis lined the curb. Cars passed slowly along the road. Hannah stood still for a moment, staring ahead. The next words were the hardest she had carried for 10 years. "It was my father," she said quietly. Jamin blinked in disbelief. "He believed you would ruin my future. So he paid someone to intercept every letter, every call." The city noise faded into the background. 10 years of love. Destroyed by a decision made by someone else. Jamin exhaled slowly. Not anger. Not even sadness. Just the heavy realization of how easily life can be changed by one hidden choice. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then Jamin finally asked the question that had been forming quietly in his mind. "Hannah, why were you flying to Vancouver?" She hesitated. Then looked down at her hands. "Because someone important lives there." Jamin waited. Her voice became softer. "Someone you've never met." She slowly lifted her eyes to meet his. "My son." Jamin froze. And the next words changed everything. "He's 9 years old." For a moment, the sounds of the airport street seemed to disappear. Jamin, early 30s, tall Korean man, sharp jawline, calm dark eyes, neatly styled black hair, wearing a dark coat, stood frozen beside the taxi lane, staring at Hannah as if the world had suddenly stopped moving. Her words echoed inside his mind. 9 years old. Hannah, late 20s, elegant Korean woman, soft pale skin, long dark hair over her shoulders, gentle almond eyes carrying years of hidden emotion, looked away toward the road. She had imagined this moment for years. Sometimes with anger. Sometimes with tears. But never like this. Never with him standing so close, looking so lost. "I wasn't going to tell you," she said quietly. "But after seeing you again, I realized you deserved the truth." Jaemin struggled to speak. You're saying, the child? Hannah nodded slowly. Yes. The taxi ride across the city was quiet. Rain had begun to fall lightly against the windows as buildings passed slowly outside. Jaemin, same appearance, early 30s Korean man, sharp jawline, short black hair, dark coat, sat beside Hannah, staring silently at the blurred city lights. Every memory from 10 years ago now felt different. Every conversation. Every promise. Every goodbye that never happened. Beside him, Hannah, same appearance, late 20s Korean woman, long dark hair, gentle emotional eyes, watched the rain slide down the glass. She had raised the child alone. Through sleepless nights. Through questions she never knew how to answer. And through the quiet hope that one day, the truth would find its way back to the man who deserved to know. The taxi stopped in front of a quiet apartment building. A warm yellow light glowed from one of the second-floor windows. Hannah stepped out first. Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, tall, sharp jawline, dark coat, followed slowly, his heart beating harder with every step toward the entrance. Inside the small apartment hallway, children's drawings were taped to the walls. Crayon sons. Stick figure families. Simple pictures filled with innocent happiness. Hannah paused in front of one door. Her hand rested on the handle. Before opening it, she turned back to him. There's something you should know first, she said softly. Jaemin looked at her. And suddenly he realized. This moment might change the rest of his life forever. Inside the apartment, a small boy sat at the living room table drawing quietly. The sound of the door opening made him look up. The boy had soft dark hair and bright curious eyes. Hannah stepped inside first. This is Ji-hoon, she said gently. Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, sharp jawline, stunned expression, stood in the doorway, unable to move. 'Cause the moment he looked at the child, his breath caught in his chest. The boy's eyes were identical to his. Ji-hoon, 9-year-old Korean boy, short dark hair, bright curious eyes, innocent expression, looked up at the stranger. Mom, he asked quietly. Who is that? Hannah, late 20s Korean woman, long dark hair, gentle emotional eyes, looked between the two of them. The moment she had feared for nearly a decade had finally arrived. Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, tall, sharp jawline, dark coat, slowly stepped forward into the room. Ji-hoon tilted his head curiously. For a long moment, father and son simply stared at each other. Two strangers connected by something deeper than either of them understood. Then the boy smiled politely. Hello, Ji-hoon said. Jaemin's voice came out almost as a whisper. Hello. And in that quiet moment, 10 years of lost time stood silently between them. The small apartment felt unusually quiet. Ji-hoon, 9-year-old Korean boy, short dark hair, bright curious eyes, innocent expression, returned to his drawings at the table, humming softly to himself, unaware that the two adults standing in the room were carrying the weight of an entire decade. Jaemin, early 30s, tall Korean man, sharp jawline, calm dark eyes, neatly styled black hair, wearing a dark coat, stood near the doorway, watching the child carefully. Every movement, every expression, felt painfully familiar. Across the room, Hannah, late 20s, elegant Korean woman, soft pale skin, long dark hair over her shoulders, gentle almond eyes carrying years of hidden emotion, folded her arms lightly as if protecting her heart. Finally Jaemin spoke. You raised him alone, all this time? Hannah nodded slowly. Yes. There was no bitterness in her voice. Only quiet exhaustion. 'Cause love had forced her to become stronger than she ever expected. Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, tall build, sharp jawline, dark coat, slowly walked closer to the table where Ji-hoon sat drawing. The boy looked up again with curiosity. "Do you like airplanes?" Jaemin asked gently. Ji-hoon's eyes brightened immediately. "Yes. I want to be a pilot one day." Jaemin smiled faintly. A quiet, almost painful smile. Because 10 years ago, that had been his own dream. Behind them, Hannah, late-20s Korean woman, long dark hair, soft emotional eyes, watched silently. For the first time since Jaemin walked into the apartment, she saw something unexpected. The child she had raised alone, and the man she had once loved, looked strangely natural standing in the same room. As if fate had quietly been waiting for this moment. Later that evening, Ji-hoon had fallen asleep on the couch. A soft blanket covered him as rain tapped gently against the apartment window. Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, tall, sharp jawline, dark coat now slightly relaxed, stood by the window staring into the rainy night. Hannah, late 20s Korean woman, long dark hair, gentle emotional eyes, stood beside him. "There's something you never told me," she said quietly. "Why did you leave so suddenly 10 years ago?" Jaemin exhaled slowly. The answer had lived inside him for a decade. "My father was dying," he said. "He needed surgery overseas. I had to leave immediately." He looked at her. "But I thought you stopped replying." And suddenly the full tragedy of their separation became painfully clear. Silence filled the room again. 10 years of misunderstandings. 10 years of loneliness. 10 years that could never be returned. Hannah, late 20s Korean woman, long dark hair, soft emotional eyes, finally spoke again. "I hated you for a long time," she admitted quietly. Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, sharp jawline, dark coat, nodded slowly. "I probably deserved that. But eventually, I stopped hating you." Jaemin looked at her. "Why?" Hannah glanced toward the sleeping child. "Because every time I looked at Ji-hoon, I remembered the man I once loved." And for the first time that night, Jaemin's eyes filled with tears. Morning sunlight slowly filled the apartment. Ji-hoon, 9-year-old Korean boy, short dark hair, bright curious eyes, ran excitedly toward the window after waking up. "Mom! Look, the rain stopped." Behind him, Jaemin, early 30s Korean man, tall, sharp jawline, dark hair, stood beside Hannah, late 20s Korean woman, long dark hair, gentle emotional eyes. For the first time in 10 years, they stood in the same quiet space without anger or confusion between them. Only the fragile possibility of something new. Jaemin looked down at the child. Then back at Hannah. "Maybe," he said softly, "it's not too late to start fixing what we lost." Hannah didn't answer immediately. But she didn't walk away either. And sometimes, that is where love quietly begins again.